Hello, my name is Dr. Mike Yeadon, and in the next 15 minutes or so, I would like to address those of you who've been vaccine injured or bereaved, and also those of you who are involved in the political process in Northern Ireland, as well as anywhere else in the world who might hear me. At the end of this process, I hope you will believe what I'm going to tell you, which shockingly is that the materials masquerading as vaccines were designed intentionally to harm the people who received them. I'm probably the most qualified former pharmaceutical company research executive in the world speaking out on this matter. And since I spent my entire career in the business of working with teams designing molecules to be new potential medicines, I think I am qualified to comment on it, and that is my shocking judgment that has been only reinforced over the last almost 4 years since I first said it. I'll also have some suggestions for what we can do together to fight against the global crime which is ongoing. So just a little bit about me so you can decide whether or not to believe me. So I'm a career-long research scientist. I've worked all of my life in the pharmaceutical industry and in biotech. My first degree included a training in toxicology. So that's an understanding of how materials can injure human beings at a molecular level and what the relationship is between the structure of them and the toxicity. In my second degree, a PhD, I did research in respiratory pharmacology, control of breathing and control of respiratory reflexes. So, and then after that, I joined the pharmaceutical industry in 1988, and I worked until very recently on new medicines for allergic and respiratory diseases. In my corporate career, I was for a long time responsible at Pfizer, then the biggest research-based drug company in the world, for everything to do with allergic and respiratory diseases in the research field. So that was my responsibility. And in the last 10 years after leaving in 2011, I was an independent, and I became the founder and CEO of a biotech company, which was eventually acquired by Novartis, which was then the biggest drug company in the world. So I have had a good career, and I was well regarded in the industry for my scientific acumen and judgments, until, of course, I started speaking out against the nonsense, the COVID pandemic, and especially the so-called vaccines. I've become persona non grata with my former colleagues after that. So I'm well qualified to comment on the toxicological principles, properties of molecules, and the kind of effects you might see from certain structures. So just very briefly, before I talk about the so-called vaccines, what happened in 2020? It's taken me a long time to get there, and I've not made everybody happy with the decision I've reached, but there was not a pandemic or a public health emergency. I don't think there was anything at all apart from lies, propaganda, fear-based information, fake diagnostic tests called PCR, and then, as it were, misattribution of real illnesses that people did have, which were called COVID when there was no such thing. But what happened shockingly was that after the World Health Organization's chairman called a pandemic, which was not true. There's never been a pandemic, won't be pandemics, they're immunologically impossible. But after he called them, many countries in the world changed radically their medical management practices for people in hospitals, also in care homes and in the community. And very briefly, in hospitals, many people were sedated, had a plastic tube put down their airway, and unconscious, put on mechanical ventilators. I can assure you that is not ever an appropriate treatment for someone with an influenza-like illness, whatever you might think COVID was. but that would not be something you would do. And if applied to frail and elderly people, they will die in large numbers, which they did. So that was the first crime. It's not a mistake. There are no mistakes here. Mistakes were not made. They were told to do this by figures at supranational level. We don't know exactly who, but we know this because these mad procedures changed in many countries all at the same time. So that's hospitals, in care homes, assisted living, old age people's homes, and so on. Many people were given drugs like midazolam, which is an injectable form of a drug like Valium, a sedative. But they were also given injections of pain-relieving drugs like morphine, even if they weren't in pain. My PhD was in the field of understanding what opiate drugs like morphine do to the respiratory reflex. And I can assure you, it suppresses and suppresses it and depresses it. So if you give an elderly person on their own an injection of midazolam, they will become sedated and sleepy. And if you give them an injection of morphine, their breathing will slow. I can tell you, it's absolutely forbidden to give a person those two drugs together, those two drug classes together, unless they are under intense, ongoing medical monitoring. And the reason is they're very likely to fall asleep and stop breathing. That, of course, is what happened. So that's hospitals and care homes. Your relatives were killed by the medical procedures that were imposed. Now, it's quite possible early on that not everybody involved knew what was happening, but I'm afraid after a few days, you'd have to be a blockhead not to realize that it was what you were doing to your charges, your patients, that was resulting in their deaths. So I've completely lost any trust in the medical profession because virtually no one has spoken up 4.5 years later. This happened to lots of people. If you listen to the recordings, heartbreaking recordings given to the Scottish COVID inquiry, I think that's probably the only place where there's been an official taking of evidence from people. And what I just described is exactly what happened to lots of people's relatives. And no doubt happened to some people in Northern Ireland as well. It certainly happened in England. There were worse things as well. People in the community were deprived of medical care that would have saved their lives. And there's plenty of evidence to say that not being given antibiotics when they had incipient bronchial pneumonia also killed thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people. And there, ladies and gentlemen, was your pandemic. All of those deaths were attributed to COVID, and you were told, this is this terrible pandemic, you need to lock down, wear masks, do what you're told. Nothing was happening at all apart from medical murder and propaganda from the television and the newspaper, politicians, and many public, well-known public figures who are doing what they were told. So, of course, one conclusion I'm going to come to later is stop listening to liars. The people who've lied to you shouldn't listen to them ever again. Stop listening to them today. But for me, I think the worst thing, because it comes out of my industry and because it's so deliberate, it requires such a lot of forethought, are the so-called vaccines. Now, we were told there was this new infectious disease. So far, so good, ladies and gentlemen. But then they said, don't worry, we'll rustle up a vaccine. And they did so in about 10 months, something like that. I can tell you, after spending a career in this industry, you can no more make a baby in 1 month with 9 women than you can make a complicated biological product in 10 months. It cannot be done. It was not done. They did something else. They created materials which were essentially injected poisons. They were not vaccines. There was never anything to vaccinate against. And when you've listened to what I've just told you, you know that must be true, because you can't do something in 10 months that normally takes 6 to 12 years. Medicines are not put together randomly. They are built, and they're built by people who are discussing with colleagues, work out what kind of materials, what kind of structures, what kind of formulations, what kind of doses you would need to add in order to hit a particular molecular target, to have a chance of a particular therapeutic goal being reached without unacceptable side effects. That's called rational design. And that is my whole career, ladies and gentlemen, from my undergraduate days to today. So when I look at the design of the medicine, whatever kind it is, and look at the design on paper and its composition, the structures and so on, it is as if I'm looking over the shoulder of the designer, someone like me, someone with my qualifications, designed these things. So when I look at them, I'm looking over the shoulder of the designer, and I can discern something of what their objectives were. What were they trying to do? And I came quickly to the conclusion that they wanted to bring about toxicity that would injure, kill, and reduce fertility. There aren't any other alternatives. And remember, there was no public health emergency. So I'll just give you 3 examples. I'm not going to be too scientific, but 3 things so you can check them. The objective of these so-called gene-based vaccines was to inject you with a genetic sequence for something called spike protein. Now, it doesn't really matter what spike protein is, if it's real, where it came from. The point is, it's a genetic sequence for a protein that doesn't belong in your body. It's non-self, it's foreign. Your immune system is a wonderful work of God and nature. It distinguishes self, things that are meant to be inside you and are fine, from anything else, foreign, non-self. If you inject a person with a genetic sequence that instructs your body to become a factory for some protein that doesn't belong in you, your immune system will detect that, and it will attack every cell that's done that instruction and kill it. Now, these materials, when injected in your arm, didn't stay in your arm. They traveled around your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your brain, your ovaries. And in every place it landed, if it was taken up and expressed, your body registered that as foreign invasion, and it attacked and killed every cell doing it. There is no other possible consequence from doing that. So that's step 1, and no one can argue that's not what they did. That is the design of them. They also picked a particular protein. I'm not really sure where spike protein came from, if it's really real, but proteins like the one they claim was encoded in these gene-based materials are known to be toxic. There are loads of experiments, lots of published experiments, showing that proteins like that one cause blood coagulation, damaged nerves, damaged heart tissue. So they injected you with something that would make your body make a protein that doesn't belong there, knowing axiomatically, automatically, unavoidably, your immune system would attack that. It would be like rejecting an organ transplant. Your body would say, that's foreign, it's got to go. Uses your immune system to kill it. And then they also inject you with something that's inherently toxic. So if it got out into your body or wherever it was made, it would harm you. And I've got a third one that cannot be argued with. At least the mRNA products from Pfizer and Moderna were encapsulated in something called lipid nanoparticles. It's really a blob of fat, complicated technical blob of fat, but that's what it is after all. And what that material did is allowed your injection to glide all around your body across all biological barriers and get everywhere in your body. Which of course is not what you would want, is it? For something that they told you was inhaled into your nose and lungs. But no, it went all around your body, into your brain, blood vessels. But in particular, I need to tell you, there were publications that are now more than 10 years old in peer-reviewed journal articles. Well, I'm skeptical about whether they're always very honest, but there were peer-reviewed journal articles showing that lipid nanoparticles were recognized over a decade ago of having a particular property, which you're not going to like to hear, which shocked me when I learned it. They tend to deposit their payload into the ovaries. That is exactly what happened with these injected materials. There was at least one study performed with the Pfizer agents for the Japanese regulatory authorities, and lo and behold, the material accumulated in the ovaries of the test animals. That is what's happened, ladies and gentlemen, to every woman and girl injected with these materials. And remember what I said about designing molecules to do things deliberately with objectives in mind? They picked lipid nanoparticles knowing they accumulate the payload in ovaries. It's not an accident. Mistakes were not made. So I tell you, as a professional who spent his whole honest scientific career in an industry I did not realize was corrupt, trying to make experimental medicines for respiratory and allergy diseases, that my experience tells me that there are multiple independent, unnecessary, and obvious mechanisms of toxicity built into these so-called vaccines. And then by sheer luck, all four companies, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer, all chose basically the same formula for their so-called vaccines. That would never happen if it was real. For a start, I would call my opposite numbers and say, we should do different things, because if something goes wrong, if we're wrong in an assumption, all of the so-called vaccines will fail for the same reason. We should do different things. It's called diversification. But no, they all did the same things because they're just lying. They were making intentionally dangerous materials, passing them off as vaccines, jabbing you and your children. And that's what they did. Of course, I didn't get injected, neither did my children and most of my relatives. Some of them didn't believe me. I'm afraid they've been injected too. So big picture, what happens, I think, from the research I've done, and of course, I'm an expert in research and development, not in politics, but I believe that very wealthy people, the kind of people who run foundations with names, have planned, as have their antecedents for a couple of generations, to take over the world, to remove the freedoms of ordinary people like us that they regard as useless eaters. They don't want us around anymore. And their intention is to strip us of our freedoms by persuading us that there are very frightening events occurring in the world and we need them to lead us to safety. There are documents you can find from a group called the Club of Rome, who in the late 1960s were commissioned by some of these people who run nameless global foundations that have hundreds of billions of pounds of worth. They were asked to come up with scenarios that would produce challenges for countries that couldn't be solved by countries on their own. So they would have to look outwards and upwards to supranational solutions. Now, guess what? The two things they came up with: pandemics of infectious diseases, which I know as an immunologist are not possible and have never happened. The other thing they said to look out for or plan for were climate change crises. Now, I've done enough research now, ladies and gentlemen. I've spoken to people who have spent as long in climate atmospheric research as I have in pharmaceutical R&D, and they have explained to me, and I understand very well, that there's all of this nonsense about carbon dioxide, global boiling, net zero. It's all a complete scam from the same people who bought you the COVID scam and the dangerous injections. It's the same people. They want one world government. They want to deprive you of your liberty. And then I'm afraid I think they will kill us using these injections, because they're going to do it again. All over the world, factories to make mRNA-based materials are being thrown up. Billions of doses are being made. And if we let them, they will stick them in our arms and people will sicken and die. So those of you who have been injured or bereaved, in my mind, no blame whatsoever attaches to you. How could you know that people you trusted and thought you could trust were lying to you? Well, that you didn't know. But if you let them inject you again, you have no sympathy from me, because they have lied to you. You've been injured or killed. And I've explained to you that they're liars and they have attacked us. So if you go along with it, you cannot be saved. All we need to do is enough of us continue to speak out about this and say, we're not having it anymore. Get lost. So don't listen to liars anymore. People who've lied to you have forfeit their trust forever, in my view. And so anyone who's in the political process, for example, in Northern Ireland, looking at this so-called public health bill, which if you pass it would allow these supranational criminals to take you from your house, to inject you by force if necessary. They are aiding and abetting a global crime. And I saw someone online say recently that if you pass that legislation, I don't think it would be unreasonable to interpret that as an act of war. It's as serious as that. So politicians, you may well be under pressure from shadowy figures, but if you go along with it in hope for like an easier time of it, you will have unlocked the doors of hell and pushed everybody in it, and you along with it as well. So this is your time to do what I'm doing, which is to speak out no matter the consequences. I say to you, if you're frightened about what happens if you speak out, you should be absolutely terrified about what's going to happen if you don't. So really, that's all I've got to say. I do think these criminals are going to do it again. They're continuing to threaten us with pandemics like bird flu, monkeypox, and so on. It is all nonsense. Stop listening to liars right now. Put things right between you and the people you love, and between you and God, if you haven't already. And for goodness sake, be one of the people who speaks out, no matter what the consequences, because if you don't, we'll lose our freedom and then our lives. Thank you.